All right, welcome back to Close Up, everyone. Pledge once again from Governor Lynch to veto a bill that would repeal the same-sex marriage law in New Hampshire. But that's not stopping supporters of traditional marriage from making a push this year. In fact, last week, a couple of hundred attended a rally in Concord to support the repeal effort. Sponsoring that bill, Representative David Bates from Windham, and representing the other side of this issue, Tyler Deaton, for standing up for New Hampshire families. Gentlemen, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you.
So let me start with you, Representative Bates. I mean, you know what the governor said. You see what the poll numbers say. It really hasn't changed a whole lot. New Hampshire residents don't feel real strongly about repealing the same-sex marriage law. Why the push this year?
Well, as you know, this legislation was filed over a year ago, and I'm personally not particularly impressed or compelled by the poll numbers. I don't know if you recall a couple of years ago when we had that ballot initiative and had a question on roughly 60% of the town warrant articles asking if people wanted the opportunity to vote on a constitutional amendment to define marriage here in New Hampshire. And the overwhelming majority, over 60% of the towns where the citizens got to vote on that petition, they approved it and said, yes, they want to vote on this. So this is not a settled issue like some would like to claim it is. I think that the people of New Hampshire are not unlike the rest of the country, where every place this has been put to a popular vote, the people have overwhelmingly said that marriage should remain between a man and a woman.
Tyler, I mean, do you agree that this is not a settled issue, at least for this year? It would appear to be, given the fact you have the governor that says, I will veto a repeal bill if it comes to my desk.
I think that it's the polls of the last year that I think are more helpful on this issue. There have been 5 statewide polls at least that have all shown a 2-to-1 margin. That's overwhelming. That 2-to-1, the people of New Hampshire support the current law, they support the freedom to marry, and they oppose this repeal effort. And you're seeing broad bipartisan support for maintaining the status quo. And that's what Standing Up for New Hampshire Families is doing and will continue to do, is to give voice to all those many people in this state who are satisfied and happy with the freedom to marry.
Let's talk about the core issue itself, Tyler. Civil unions provide the same rights that the same-sex marriage law does. Why is the word marriage so important?
I would say that right now the debate on that has kind of moved forward. We have the freedom to marry. We have marriage equality. Over 1,800 couples in our state are married. And so the question becomes more, will we be a state that takes away rights? And I think that that runs contrary to everything that New Hampshire believes in. I mean, this is the live free or die state. And whenever you look at what's happened now in our 3rd year of having the freedom to marry, people are happy. It's working out very well. That's why the polls are what they are, with 2-to-1 overwhelming support.
Well, I wouldn't agree that people are happy about this. I think that the vast majority of the public still believes marriage should remain the union of a man and a woman. That's what the fundamental purpose of this legislation is, to return to the true meaning of marriage. The current law that we have now is an illegitimate definition of marriage. It's a the idea of same-sex marriage is a contradiction in terms. And I think that there is overwhelming support to return to that proper definition. And as you said, the same legislation will reenact a civil union law that will give all the rights and benefits to those who are party to a civil union as those who are properly married.
Let me ask you, is this, in your opinion, a state issue? Because obviously, you know, the legislature will vote on it, but we're seeing a lot of money coming out, you know, from outside the state on both sides of this. Is it a state issue, or should it remain a state issue, or do you think it's fair how this is being played out?
Well, I'm not sure if, you know, what do you mean in terms of fairness?
No, I mean, you know, the legislature will be deciding on this, but you have hundreds of thousands of dollars potentially being poured into the state from the National Organization of Marriage and Standing Up for New Hampshire Families. They're outside of here, and they really don't have an interest in what takes place in New Hampshire. So there's my question.
Oh, well, I would say, though, real quickly, Standing Up for New Hampshire Families is nothing like the National Organization for Marriage. Standing Up for New Hampshire Families is a homegrown, statewide, bipartisan coalition.
Do you agree with that?
Well, anyone can
Absolutely
go.
Not. The records don't show that.
Anyone can go to standingupfornhfamilies.org, and they can see our leadership council, which consists of nearly 300 respected community leaders from around the state. Just this past week, we announced that best-selling author Jodi Picoult has joined the leadership council. And so there are people on both sides of the aisle who are stepping up to say that marriage equality has worked out. It's in its 3rd year. Why get rid of it? What's the compelling answer for why we need to change course when it's working out so well and it's so popular?
Where do you think this is headed? We just saw California. The Supreme Court in California ruled that Prop 8 was unconstitutional, would have, you know, victory for same-sex marriage. Is this going to wind up, Tyler, do you think, in the U.S. Supreme Court?
I'm really not sure. I mean, what we're focused on right now is the New Hampshire General Court. It's the State House and the State Senate. It's one of the most representative bodies in the world. And right now, they're deliberating this. There are many state representatives who are trying to make up their mind. I think what's amazing to see is that right now, the Democrats in the House are nearly unified in protecting the status quo, but there are dozens of Republican state representatives who are saying the same thing, that we need to leave this alone, stay out of people's personal lives. The freedom to marry is a good thing.
Well, I think you're going to discover that when we come and actually have the vote on it, that the most representative body in the world, the New Hampshire legislature, is going to vote to return to traditional marriage. And, you know, to your point, although obviously we're dealing with it as a state issue right now, I fully expect that it ultimately is going to wind up in the Supreme Court. The decision that we had this week in California, the Ninth Circuit, was, I think, a three-judge panel. Without question, it's going to be appealed to the full court, and irrespective of what that decision turns out to be, it's going to be appealed to the Supreme Court with whatever party loses that decision, and it's probably ultimately going to be decided there. That may lead to a federal marriage amendment. I don't know, but you know, the one thing I agree with Denton on right now is Deaton. Yeah, I'm sorry. It is a state issue right now. We're dealing with it in the state legislature, and that's proper. And as I said, even though, you know, he certainly has a majority of Democrats, when the votes are counted, we will have a majority, and it'll be I think a more significant majority than the original law that was just barely passed 3 years ago. And so we'll...
Well, and Representative Bates wants to make this out to like it's a one-party thing, that the Democrats are pushing this. That's just not the case. The Republican Party is changing, and it's changing very quickly. I'm a Republican. I'm from Nashua. I'm the secretary of the New Hampshire Young Republicans. And I can tell you that the next generation sees this as freedom, as individual liberty, and that it's a good thing to let two people who love each other come together in marriage.
And back to your earlier point, I wasn't suggesting that there wasn't some grassroots support for standing up for New Hampshire families, but there is some outside money funding that outside of New Hampshire, which brings me to my next question. How much should these social issues, same-sex marriage, play a role, do you think, come November? I mean, because in the Republican Party, we're split between the moderate Mitt Romney and the very conservative Rick Santorum, and there seems to be a bit of a fracture there. How much do you expect this to be a part of things, Representative Bates?
Well, first of all, I'd like to comment on your previous question. I guess we kind of drifted away from it about the out-of-state money.
It's a free-for-all. Go ahead.
Sure. Well, you know, it's an interesting question, but it's sort of, in my opinion anyway, not terribly relevant, because a lot of people always want to make a significant issue out of out-of-state money, you know, trying to influence various policy decisions.
Well, now we're really drifting away from the issue there. We can go down that road if you like.
But the fact of the matter is, it happens on any issue that's of significance, consequence, right to work, pro-life issues, whatever it is, there's always out-of-state organizations that want to influence a decision, and especially something like this marriage decision, because it will have ramifications. There will be a ripple effect in other states. For example, we have 2 states that are going to be voting on constitutional amendments this year to define marriage in their constitutions, which will add to the 30 states that have already defined marriage to only be between a man and a woman. So I think there's a lot of states looking with interest what's going to happen here in New Hampshire, and it is an important decision, obviously, for our state, but also for the rest of the country in many respects.
Okay. I certainly do grant you that, but Tyler, I want to give you the last word. Back to the question I was asking you. How much of this, how much of an issue do you think this should be come November?
No, and I like that question because we have a clear indicator. In 2010, Republicans were delivered a landslide victory. I was there in the trenches working on some of these campaigns, and I know, and I saw with my own eyes, that Republicans were campaigning on jobs and the economy. No one was campaigning to repeal the freedom to marry, and of course they wouldn't because it's unpopular to do so.
All right. Well, we'll see what happens up in Concord. Gentlemen, thanks very much for joining us. Appreciate that. And coming up next, Republican strategist Mike Dennehy will try to make some sense of what's going on in the presidential primary. Could a brokered convention really be a possibility? Stay with us. We'll talk about it.